This video is going to be about 10 minutes long, but in the next 10 minutes, I hope to save you about $250,000 and 9 to 12 really frustrating months. And the reason I'm making this video is I've had a few conversations in the last week or two with founders from New Zealand who have said, hey, we've tried to hire Americans, it's been really expensive, the results haven't been great for us, it's essentially been just like a large waste of money with not a lot to show for it. So I thought I would share just a few of the things that I have learned, a few of the things that I have observed, having lived in America for the last 8 years. And you might be asking, who am I, what do I know? Well, my name's Sam Marilich. I run a recruiting agency called Next Venture. I've spent my entire career in the US hiring salespeople at B2B software as a service startups, mostly in San Francisco and New York. Today I'm going to talk about the differences that I have observed between Americans and New Zealanders. A lot of these insights will probably map to what Australians and the British also find when dealing with Americans. So the first thing, right? Americans are expensive. The first thing that you need to know when it comes to hiring Americans is expect some sticker shock. Actually, take whatever you think is a reasonable amount of money to pay someone, double it, and then you might need to double it again. Whatever you do, just for your mental health, do not convert this back to your home currency. This is also a good rule when looking at prices and you're visiting San Francisco or New York. In general, people in America don't realize how good they have it, and people outside of America also don't realize how good they have it. And you might think, well, what if we just hire from a lower cost of living area? The truth is, when it comes to software salespeople, there isn't a particularly big location discount. So, the only difference that you'll really have if you said, hey, let's just look in Texas or let's just look in North Carolina, South Carolina. Yeah, you might save like $5,000 to $10,000, but you're also going to massively constrict your applicant pool or your talent hiring pool. Now, people in New Zealand will say, well, yeah, Americans make a lot of money, but the healthcare system sucks, or Americans don't take time off. And look, I'm not here to argue with you. America is a brutal place to be poor. I don't think that's much of a debate, but we're not talking about poor people here. We are talking about people who work in tech. And people who work in tech generally have really good healthcare. They actually take a lot more time off than you might think. Added up, it's probably quite similar to what people take off in New Zealand. It's a little bit more dispersed throughout the year, and there's a few nuances that I think are worth talking about. So look, Americans generally have about 2 weeks off. If you have friends in tourism, they'll often tell you Americans don't come and visit any country for more than 2 weeks. And that generally holds true. But I was talking to a friend who has a company in New Zealand, does a lot of hiring, and we were kind of just talking about what we've observed. I think this has changed kind of post-COVID, but Americans don't really work the week after Christmas. Between Christmas and New Year's, that's generally a dead week. The week around Thanksgiving is generally a dead week. The week around July 4th is generally a dead week. You've also got those 2 weeks, and there are about 13 federal holidays. So those are days where people aren't doing things. I'm recording this video on May 30th. We had Monday was Memorial Day. That was a day that people took off. So I've got this conspiracy theory that a lot of the negative stories you hear about America are actually very happily encouraged by overseas governments who just don't want people to know how much poorer they are versus their American counterparts. It's just not a very useful map of reality, unfortunately. So, if you make $180,000 in New Zealand, you have a higher income than about 97% of people in the country. It's about 120,000 US dollars. It's what a graduate software engineer makes at Google, puts you in about the 86th percentile in the US, which is another way of saying there are about 50 million Americans who make that much money. The American upper middle class is just so much larger than other countries. And the top 10%, the top 5% make a lot more than that again. It's common to talk to people in technology who are in their late 20s and they're making upwards of $250,000 a year. Now, before you really just give up, I do want to reassure you, this isn't all base salary. The way that engineers often talk about this is they're talking about their total compensation. That's their base, their bonus, and then their stock options or their equity. The way that salespeople talk about their compensation is they talk about their base salary and then their variable compensation, which is the money that they make, their commission. The way that on-target earnings are generally run in the US is it's usually a 50% base and 50% variable. Now, there is a flip side to this, right? So America is an extremely expensive country to hire people in, and we know that these people don't work as much as we've been led to believe. But the good news is Americans are probably the easiest people to sell to. It's a general truism that good salespeople love to buy. And the good news about that rep who's costing you 250 grand a year is you can expect them to bring in $1 million a year. And if they don't, well, you can fire them without a lengthy dismissal process. And this brings me on to my second point. Americans are very, very good at selling themselves. And more specifically, tall poppy syndrome does not exist in America. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're the VP of sales at a tech company in New Zealand. You've taken the company from $1 million to $100 million in sales. How do you talk about that? My guess for 90% of people is something along the lines of, I work in tech or I do software sales. That's just not how things work in America. The defense mechanism that we have against tall poppy syndrome means that we're very bad at accurately evaluating claims made by Americans. I remember going to an event in New Zealand a few years back, and one of the speakers touted himself as being an instrumental part of a company that had a $1.5 billion acquisition. This guy had been an SDR and then an SDR manager. Not exactly the guy calling the shots. The way I would think about it, it's like, imagine all of the body parts, they've just run a very impressive marathon and the pinky finger saying, hey, without me, this wouldn't have happened. Now, people will get upset and they'll say it's lying or deceptive, but that's not useful, right? The real answer or the real issue is you just don't speak American English yet. When it comes to Americans making claims, you just need to be extremely specific at evaluating what's being said. You'll see something like, I hit 120% to plan in Q2. Well, that's great. How'd you do for the rest of the year? 40% for the year. Oh, you were number 2 on the team. Okay, great. How big was the team? Where did number 3 and where did number 1 come in? It's not that Americans are lying. It's just that you need to drill down into the claims that are being made to really objectively understand how good a candidate is. A vague answer is a red flag. You can broadly assume that whatever a Kiwi is telling you is probably underselling it, and whatever an American is telling you is the most generous interpretation of events. But frankly, you just need to get used to it because the United States punishes the shy. And if you're going to sell your product here, you need to learn how to position yourself effectively. If you are 10x better at something, you need to say that you are 10x better at something. Now, you're allowed to be as meek as you want when you step back on that Air New Zealand flight. If you're flying to New York, these direct flights are a game changer. But when you're stateside, it is showtime, right? You need to put your big boy pants on, get that 10-gallon hat. It's time to sell. Now, speaking of evaluating things that Americans say, you also need to know what American politeness looks like, right? So, in America, my friend means a person that I've met before. My best friend means someone who's actually a friend. The best thing ever, it's just something that's pretty good. It might be pancakes. The worst thing ever, something that's mildly bad, might be pancakes. In the same way that you need to carefully evaluate claims made by Americans when it comes to how they sell, you also need to carefully evaluate claims by Americans when it comes to how they buy. If you're from New Zealand, you probably aren't used to such easy compliments. You end up with happy ears and you get upset when deals don't close. If you don't have the next meeting on the books, you need to assume the deal is dead. If the prospect will get back to you, you need to assume the deal is dead. You need to get comfortable asking the hard questions, and you need to get comfortable with hearing no. So you need to get snappy, right? When it comes to hiring, you need to be asking these questions like, where do we need to be compensation-wise for that to make sense? Where are you at with regard to opportunities? You need to get good at cutting through the noise. Now, the good news, there is always another prospect out there. And if you don't believe me, next time you come to America, fly to Houston, fly to Atlanta, or fly to Phoenix, get a rental car. You can pick, either drive north to south or south to north, east to west, and just go through the endless suburban sprawl. And then you can genuinely give me a call and you can say, I don't think there's I don't think there's enough prospects out there. I don't think there's enough opportunity. Get real. New Zealand has a GDP the size of Iowa. Iowa is a state known for corn and being the first place that people kick off their presidential elections. Iowa brings in 0.96% of America's GDP, not even 1%. The reality is you're probably erring on the side of not being transactional enough rather than the inverse, right? So there is a strong appreciation for a call to action in American business culture. And speaking of calls to action, if you are thinking of hiring in the US, you want someone who understands English, both in the New Zealand and the American sense of the word, my calendar link is below. Book some time, we can talk about your situation. If you don't want to do that, I have a video, it's about 20 minutes long, about how you can hire great people in 2024. You should check it out. Either way, I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.